Sorry.
So you see there's a bunch of other body movements, for instance from the handle, and that
All stand. Coronial Court now stands resumed. Please be seated.
Not at this stage, Your Honour. I can do it in reply if need be.
Mr. Edwards, or sorry, Ms. Wild. Sorry, Ms. Wild.
Yes, I have questions. Thank you, Your Honour. Sergeant King, my name's Wild and I'm a lawyer for Naja.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wild.
You said in evidence today, Sergeant King, that when they get emotional, they get violent. Can I ask you to clarify when you say they, what do you mean?
I think I was probably explaining Aboriginal people when they're in a position of conflict or a position of sorrow, death, namely that they can get very emotional. And when they get very emotional, they can bring a lot of anger. And I know they do have a bit of trouble dealing with anger sometimes, and that can be exhibited into violence.
Okay, so when you say they, you mean Aboriginal people in general?
Not so much it's hard to say, Ms. Wild, because I've been to nearly every Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory, probably about 2 or 3, for a whole range of incidents, sometimes for violence for rights, sometimes for search and rescue when people have died, other times just for other matters. And generally, they're very emotional people, they are. They've big families, but I don't want to generalise, but that's just my impression.
Okay, then perhaps would it be fair to say when you say Aboriginal people, do you mean Aboriginal people living on community?
Yeah, that'd be a fair assumption for ones I've seen, yes.
And is it your view that Aboriginal people living on community are more violent when emotional than the general population?
No, I wouldn't say that, no. I would say that they're more emotional because there's more groups and more family and more people, and that mob mentality that happens when people get emotional.
All right, but you said that when they get emotional, they get violent.
They can do, yes.
Right. So therefore, if they're more emotional, then they have a greater likelihood of becoming violent than the general population. Is that what your evidence?
Yeah, it would be. I think, Your Honour, the case would be the circumstances of the emotion. Like, there's nothing wrong with sorry business people being upset, but I have seen in cases when they get into sorry business, they start wailing and going through their process. It can turn. Not all the time, definitely not all the time, but it has in certain circumstances.
Okay. And in fact, I think you said when angry, they may become unpredictable.
Yes.
Right. And is it your view that Aboriginal people living on community are more unpredictable than the general population when angry?
Well, yeah, for those reasons I stated before, yes.
You were concerned that a large group of people may descend upon the police station, is that right?
That's correct.
All right, the fear of the police members at the station was that a large group of people may come with sticks, is that right?
Yes.
And that was forming part of a risk assessment?
Yes.
Would you agree that you could describe that as a mob mentality that you were concerned about?
I was concerned that when a group of people get together with emotion and an underlying cause, in which case justification of why police have done it, a mob mentality may be formed.
Yes.
Yes.
And you mean, and this community in Yuendamu at this time you were concerned about, is that
Yeah,
right?
because I was right there in front of it, yes.
Sergeant, I'm going to take you to the footage that we've seen this morning. The part of your role as a tactical commander was to be part of the team to inform the rest of the family about the death in the following morning. Is that right?
My role as tactical commander wasn't part of that, but I introduced myself into part of that because I thought it was important that I was present.
Right. In fact, your priorities changed when you realised that the family weren't aware that he had passed. Is that right?
The priorities changed in the sense I'm still providing advice to the forward commander. We still were going to implement a range of options and plans in case something happened. I guess the fact is that I thought it was a bit more of a likelihood of confrontation. If Kumanjayi had been removed, I thought we'd have a much better chance of negotiating, engaging with the community and talking to them. And the chance of them coming to the station and potentially forcing a confrontation would be significantly reduced. With Kumanjayi still present, and if they found out and came to the station, I wasn't at that stage and confident that we could engage with them in a civil sense because I didn't have any relationships with anybody. I knew Sergeant Zhang didn't have any relationships, so we have to rely back on the local members and Derek to
You thought
help.
it was important for you to be present when the family were told about
Yes,
passing.
and that's a good question, actually. I'm glad you asked it. There was a couple of reasons for that. Was that Julie Frost is the OIC of the station. She has a relationship with the community. It's important that she's there and she talks to them, she knows them. I wanted Terry to come along, and he had to come along as forward commander. As you see me saying, he's the boss man. He's in charge. All things come to him. And then I wanted to come down and explain why TRG were there. We wore a different uniform. They wanted, what are you guys here? And I also wanted to explain to them, I've been to Unity before. I've worked in Alice Springs. I've worked in desert country. I've seen things, and I came down for the riots in 2010. So to try and say, this isn't some person from Darwin trying to tell us what to do. It isn't the case at all. I have an understanding of what you're going through and what you're doing. And that way, if they had any concerns about TRGs, I was the person responsible for them, so you can come and talk to me.
And it's fair to say, Sergeant, that your actions and words are planned and deliberate.
Words, sorry? What words?
Would you agree that that you've switched on the minute you go to Harvey Aviation? Is that right?
Yeah, getting into that mind frame of what we're doing, yes.
So you're in tactical commander mode from the time you hit the airstrip, is that fair?
Pretty much from the time the Superintendent Gill rang me at home, but flicked straight on, yeah.
And everything you do from then is intentional, is that right?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
And you've rightfully recognised that your actions may define relationships between police and people viewing them in years to come.
Yes.
When you first arrive at the house at 9:30 in the morning that we've just seen, the first interaction you have is with Mr. Eddie Robertson, and he's trying to express his concern that there's a man with a gun sitting in his yard. Do you remember that?
No, my understanding with Eddie, I was trying to confirm with him that the right people were there for us to tell the death message to. I don't recall anything about a gun.
Well, he said that sitting down in my yard there with a machine gun, one of your people.
No person with a long arm was present during that death message. It was just Terry Zhang, myself and Julie. Everyone else was back in vehicles.
And Mr. Robertson was expressing concern that there was someone with a machine gun outside his house when his little son was inside.
Can you give me a reference to the time frame? Sorry, Your Honour.
Can I just understand, was it the house that they were at delivering the message to Rakisha, or was it at a different house that he was talking about?
The first house that we've seen the body on this morning.
Right, so you're suggesting that Mr. Robertson is saying that there's someone with a gun in the yard at that house?
Yes.
Right. I wondered whether he was talking about a different location or a different time when I heard it myself, but...
Your Honour, there was no one there with a long arm. The plan right from the start was myself, Terry Zhang and Julie Frost would walk in with our normal accoutrement belts, which you wear every time. All other members would stay in the vehicles and stay back. We didn't need any greater police presence. I was more than comfortable. Eddie had guaranteed us that, well, not guaranteed, but told us it'd be fine to walk up, and we just walked in. So I'm not too sure where that's come from.
And we have, of course, heard some evidence from you that there were later on in the morning police with rifles,
Yes.
which you didn't know about at the time.
Yep, that's at the crime scene.
At a crime scene, and when you went out to deliver the message to Rakisha, were there any other police out in the community at that time that you're aware of?
Only in the vehicles, which was my team 150 or 100 metres back, just ready to respond if needed.
And the members of those police vehicles, what weaponry did they have with them?
They would have been the TRG members, the ballistic vest, helmet, and their M4 and less lethal options.
How visible were they?
Well, I guess if you walked up to the police vehicle from 10 metres away, you would have seen them, but most of their weapons sit in front of them, they would have been pointing down. So you would have to almost point to the point where you're looking into the car to see them. They wouldn't be brandishing them or holding them up because that's just not practical the way we hold them.
How many metres away were the police vehicles?
From where I was? From my statement, I think it's 100, 150 metres. We picked a point that night when we planned where we would come, where they would be to be close enough to respond, but I didn't want them anywhere near the house and I didn't need them anywhere near where I was.
You never discovered what Mr. Robertson was talking about when he was talking about the machine gun in his yard.
Sorry?
You never discovered what Mr. Robertson
The
was
first I've
talking
heard of was when you mentioned it right then. I've never heard of him talking about anyone with a machine gun in his yard at all until you mentioned it 5 minutes ago.
Well, in fact, on the body worn, it's audible. You say you told him to focus on the reason that you were there. Is the interaction you have with him?
I don't think I was talking about that. It'd be more the case that people were starting to get upset and to focus what we were doing. I could be wrong, but when people were coming out and everyone's getting agitated, and I think from looking at the body, well, my recollection is that you're starting to engage in family with different reasons. I said, oh, let's focus what we're here. We're here to deliver the death message to family, then move on to the next group and then go and get the crime scene. That was my understanding.
All right. Perhaps you can watch the footage later, but I submit to you that you dismissed his concerns about the machine guns.
In fairness, I think it needs to be played.
Yes, perhaps if we could.
Just before we start, I noticed there is a transcript as well.
Where's the transcript?
Oh, apparently it's not in the transcript. I apologise. I'll sit down.
That's all right, Eddie. That's all right. Yeah, so when she comes, Julia will speak to her.
No, I don't talk to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not only that, excuse me, there was another police sitting down there in my yard there with a machine gun,
Who?
sub-40 gun. But the police, my
Response
my
team
son
was
said,
there,
response
my
group.
little boy
And
was
my little son was
inside.
playing inside.
My son was here.
And my grandson was playing inside.
Yeah, but
I'm the one that helped these people.
we can talk about that after. Yep. No, I can't hear it. You know what we're here for this morning. Eddie, let's focus on that. Yep. I can't hear what Eddie's saying clearly enough where I'm sitting right now.
Could we have the last 30 seconds again? Just from there, Beck.
8 years old.
Yeah, so when she comes, Julia will speak to her.
No, I don't talk to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not only that, excuse me, there was another police sitting down there in my yard there with a machine gun,
Who?
sub-40 gun. But the police,
The
my
response
my
team
son
was
said,
there,
response
my
group.
little boy
And my
was
little son was
inside.
playing
My
inside.
son was here.
And my grandson was playing inside.
Yeah, but
I'm the one that helped these
yeah,
people.
we can talk about that after. Yep.
I don't get it.
You know what we're here for this morning. Eddie, let's focus on that. Yep. You want to, Julia, speak? I can hear the word machine gun, and I don't know, but looking at that, my interpretation that he's talking about when they went and tried to apprehend Kumanjayi the night before, when I think there's some footage or some discussion about a member of IOT was approached about why you've got that gun. Is that correct? I think, but no one was present there, and we didn't need to cordon it off. We didn't need those sort of weaponry because it just wasn't required.
Mr. Robertson was clearly concerned about it, wasn't he?
Well, now you pointed it out, it looks like, yeah, you raised it with me, yes.
But you've asked him to focus on the issue that you're there for.
Yes.
And you haven't then asked him any further about what his concerns were. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
Now, further in that interview, when you're effectively trying to sympathise with the community, you say this, you said police are heard also because this is going to cause problems for us.
Yes.
And the problems it may cause, potentially political problems, is that right?
Well, it's just about police are part of the community. Like they live there, they work with, they have relationships, and there's always going to be dissent. And we saw that in Port Keats, what happened years ago, and or any incident where we go and arrest and police are involved in a matter, and we want everyone to be safe. It's just because we live there and we come and go every 2 years doesn't mean we're part of it, not part of it. So,
relationship problems, yes. Reputational issues.
Oh, definitely.
But it's hardly equivalent to the death of a family member, is it?
In what context, sorry?
The way you're framing it is that it's equivalent. The police are hurting as well when you've just told family that they're...
But I think that's a just statement. Police are hurting. We've got a significant amount of police who are very passionate about bush policing, and a significant amount of police officers have worked in Yunnamur who know family. So we as an organisation would be feeling devastated by this as well. The last thing we want is our police officers involved in a critical incident with a shooting, and especially with the community we're part of.
Okay, thank you, Sergeant. To Lottie, you say this. But Lottie, I have to point out that a policeman was stabbed and he had to go to hospital as well. And the reason, I'm paraphrasing, but the reason the policeman did what he did is because he thought he was going to die.
That's correct.
Right. You've given evidence today that the reason you said that is because you wanted the community to listen to you.
Yes.
And that you needed a bit of narrative about what happened.
That's correct.
That's correct. You wanted to control the narrative.
Yes.
You were concerned about the Bush Telegraph.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. At that stage, you didn't know who was and who wasn't a witness. Is that right?
No.
An eyewitness.
No.
In fact, you asked Lottie later if she was there or not.
Yeah, because you started talking about people who were there, and I said, "Were you there? Come forward, give us the information."
Would you agree that this desire to control the narrative has a potential to contaminate witnesses?
Yeah, it definitely has a potential, but I would also say that the Bush Telegraph, and the reason I said that to her was I could see that she was starting to get emotional and go off track of it, and I just wanted to put it back. I wasn't getting an opportunity to say it again because she was getting worked up, which is fully understandable.
Okay. You've also said that the officer went to hospital. Was that to convey that the injury suffered was serious and required hospitalisation?
Yes, and also just to say that a police officer had been injured.
Right. And that was part of controlling the narrative?
Yes.
Now, apart from the potential to contaminate witnesses, you'd agree that it's not exactly a sensitive approach?
No, so I agree by looking at it. Yes, there's you could say a lack of empathy in my talking to them. But the reason for that, Your Honour, is that Julie had started to talk and they weren't interested. Terry had tried to come in and they just turned away from him. So I thought it was imperative to try and take a leadership role to try and be a bit, I don't like to use the word dominant, but a little bit more controlling, saying this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. I didn't want to be there 15 minutes to talk about it. I wanted to get in, pass the message, tell them what was next, and then let them carry on with their business. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to.
You've agreed that it wasn't exactly a sensitive approach.
Yes, I agree.
You're telling a grandmother that her grandson's passed away and essentially saying that, well, it was his fault. Do you agree with that?
Whose fault?
Kumanjayi's fault.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. No, I wouldn't agree with that. It was his fault. I said there was a circumstance. We're trying to work out what happened. I said the police officer discharged his weapon. I said there's two people here. The coroner will get involved. Investigators, detectives will determine what happened, and it's important we get witnesses to find out.
You have said that it wasn't a no reason.
Yeah.
And was that also, as well as to control the narrative, was part of the reason so that to essentially control her emotional response?
No, it wasn't about that. It was about getting the message out to the Bush Telegraph to everybody. So they go back to Larjumanu, Kalkarinja, or Walpi mob, also in Alice Springs. So they said, the policeman shot him, the policeman shot him. What happened? And they said, the policeman was stabbed and the policeman shot him. So they're trying to put a bit of perspective on it rather than they just came into the community, went through the house and they just shot him. And once those sort of messages and that sort of messaging gets out, that's all they listen to. And it's very hard to come back and try and engage them to try and say, no, there's more to it. So I just want them to understand that it wasn't a case of he just went in and shot them. There was an incident that's occurred. As a result, a police officer had discharged his firearm. As a result of that firearm, Kumanjayi had unfortunately passed away, and we're now conducting investigation to find the reason why.
Sergeant, I want to refer you to the Police General Order in relation to deaths in custody. Now, number Order 22 states that an investigation into the death of a person in custody must be seen to be objective and impartial, as well as comprehensive and professional. Now, I'd ask you to comment on how that directive sits with your attempt to control the narrative at such an early stage.
But general orders are a guideline we refer back to the investigations. At that point in time, my mission was to ensure no further people were going to become injured for any reason. And with my experience attending numerous communities and with these sort of instances, it was really, really important to set that messaging from the start. Now, I acknowledge, yes, that it could have been seen that you're a contaminating witness because the police officer had been stabbed, but I also acknowledge the fact that they already told everyone in the community he'd been stabbed and the police officer had done it because they all came to the police station that night demanding what happened. So it wasn't a case of something that happened in an outstation and no one knew what happened out there. They'd had all night to talk about it, so good, bad or otherwise, I assumed that they would have understood some of that narrative already. I was just trying to put in some context.
Okay, but to go back to the words objective and impartial, and not only must it be objective and impartial, but be seen to be objective and impartial.
In relation to my messaging?
I think that the second half of paragraph 22 of the general order should be put just in fairness because
Okay, so the second part is, however, the psychological effects of such incidents on members and families of victims involved can be significant and need to be considered during subsequent investigations. Does that change your understanding of the...
Look, I'm not familiar with the general order enough to read it and recite back to you. But again, I'll go back to the point. My focus at that point in time was to make sure no one else got hurt. I was subsequently aware there'd be a coronial investigation and how detectives would do that. I do not believe that my comments at that time, now even on reflect, that would affect that investigation. And if it did, then I would say I felt the need to control that narrative was far more important at that time than it was for the general order to take place. We as police officers have discretion in how do we apply that. Now, I could be proved wrong and I'm happy to be corrected, but my experience, again, dealing with communities with emotion and the potential for an escalation of force for all parties involved, I've done that before, it's worked extremely effectively, and I relied on that experience to ensure that we could maintain calm and order and we could move on with the business, the process of grieving.
Sergeant King, at the end of your conversation, you encourage Lottie to tell people to come down to the station if they're present at the house.
Yes.
You agree that it's important for people to tell their story as soon as possible to
Yes.
an event. And the way you do it is this. You say, Lottie, if there were people there last night, it's really important you can ask them to come to the police station. Detectives will put them in a room by themselves and speak to them all by themselves. That's what you said to Lottie?
Yes.
And she said to you, how can we go and talk to somebody? How can we go and talk to somebody when someone is hurt?
Well, that's a justifiable answer, yeah.
Yes. Do you understand what she meant by that?
I guess he's saying we're grieving right now. We don't have time to come and talk to you and tell you a story. We need to talk to family and start our process.
Sergeant King, do you think your approach was effective in encouraging people to come down to the station and make statements?
I'll have to speak to the detectives. We did the same at the next house we went to, and I spoke to the grandfather. We spoke to everybody and sent the message as well. I'm not too sure if people came. I know that there were some people who come down to the station later that morning to ask what happened, if we could explain what happened, which we did. In relation to witnesses, you'd have to speak to detectives, because if a witness came forward, we would have pushed them straight to the detectives and say, hey, you need to talk to them.
The TRG often get called out for critical incidents, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you think it would be useful for TRG members to have some training in how to meet their tactical objectives when dealing with family in a sensitive way?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I've no further questions, Jenny.
Mr. McMahon.
Thanks, Sergeant, my name is McMahon. I appear for the Pro and Crew Committee of Yundamud, which is a justice committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Martin.
Good afternoon. Have you got your statement there?
Yes, I have.
I'm going to take you to some practical matters in your statement. Towards the end, it's about the sixth or so last page. You list a whole lot of weapons. I'll hold the page up.
So, is that on the emergency action orders, is it?
Yeah, it says emergency action order, and then it's got gas. The first word on gas will be deployed in the form of...
Page 5? Yes. Yep, down the bottom.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I want to do briefly, without wasting any time, is just to explain for the court what some of these weapons are able to do, and then I'm going to ask you some questions more on the line of what you've already been asked to follow.
Yep.
So starting at the top of the page, you've got under gas, which will be deployed in the form of 40mm CS scat. So a CS scat, a CS muzzle blast, and OC muzzle blast, are they all the same kind of weapon? 40mm cartridge?
They're a cartridge, but the difference between the last one, the other two, is the OCS capsicum spray. The ones above are tear gas or CS.
Oh, it's tear gas.
Yeah, CS or tear gas, yes.
CS is tear gas. It's got a range of about 70 metres, is that right?
No, the CS gas can go out to potentially 70 metres depending on wind. The muzzle blast rounds are about a 5 to 10 metre range.
And they're fired out of what weapon?
40mm launcher.
Is that more like a shotgun or a grenade launcher?
It's more of a grenade launcher because it's a 40mm grenade launcher, but yeah.
And when the gun is fired, there's a delay before the cartridge explodes.
With the CS cats, yes, it'll send the pellets out and it'll land. And when they land, they start burning because it's a compressed pellet and it releases the agent.
And if it lands on people's skin, what happens?
Well, those sort of rounds, when they land, they're just going to bounce straight off. Yeah. If you had a case of potentially someone was unconscious laying on the ground that landed on them, yes, it could potentially burn them.
But it can actually kill a person, can't it? If it hits the person in the wrong part of the body.
No, the CS Scats, I would say no, because the velocity is not as high on those rounds, so no. Or highly unlikely.
Yeah, what's the velocity? How many 100 metres a second?
I wouldn't know, but I know I've fired them numerous times and watched them land and hit other structures and targets, and it's caused minimal impact.
The next issue of grenades. Can you just give a brief explanation of what those 4 grenades are?
So a smoke grenade just puts out a smoke. It's non-toxic. The OC Pocket Tactical is a grenade that puts out capsicum spray cloud, and the CS Triple Chaser, it's a tear gas grenade that breaks into 3 components and puts out again the CS agent. And the Pocket Tactical, same as the OC Pocket Tactical, it's just a tear gas grenade.
The idea of the grenades is that they don't hit people but hit the ground and then explode?
No, they actually, with those grenades, they have a pellet inside, so when you throw them, it has a little hole on the side and it just pumps out gas. Right. It doesn't actually explode or anyway.
So it's thrown in the same way as a lethal grenade?
Yes.
On one of your other pages, you talk about using visible lasers on M4s.
That's correct.
Just so people understand what that means that someone has a rifle, an M4 or an AR-15, they raise the rifle to their eye, they point it at the centre of mass of a body, and then the laser light shines on the body. If they activate the laser, yes, the laser beam can be seen. Lasers are mounted on like a telescope, like a scope onto a rifle, is that correct?
They might be mounted onto the rifle itself, yes.
Yeah. So when someone sees a laser beam on their chest, what that means is they have a rifle, like an AR-15 or an M4, pointed at their chest.
It could be perceived that, Your Honour, but sometimes when we'll do it from great distance. They won't see the AR rifle, they'll see the dot. And the aim of that is they see the dot, hang on, they're looking at me. So then they have to take an appreciation that, oh, they're looking at me, maybe I'll stop what I'm doing or anything else.
It's more than looking at me.
What it means is that the person who sees the dot on their chest, what it means, the person who sees the dot on their chest knows that a rifle is lined up pointing at their chest.
They could perceive that, yes.
How else could they perceive it?
Because people use laser pointers to point at each other all the time. We have people pointing at aircraft.
When they're heading towards, the example you used was heading towards the police station, in a crowd marching at the police station, you want to keep them at more than 50 yards, you point the lasers at them, put them on the chest and it slows them down or stops them. That's what you said before, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Clearly the perception within all of that is that they're being lined up with the rifle.
They could perceive that.
And the rifles that are used at that moment in time, should they be used, would they be loaded
Yes, they would.
with lethal ammunition, right?
That's correct.
The next item there is the 12 gauge beanbag.
Yes.
So that's a 12 gauge shotgun. The beanbag is a non-lethal
Round, yes.
round, correct? It covers what, 70 metres a second, something like that?
Oh, I'm not sure the velocity. I'll have to check.
And it's a bag of lead shot which explodes when it hits the human body, right?
No, it's a bag of lead shot which is wrapped up in a polycarbonate type
Like a pillow?
material, like a pillow, and then when it hits them, it just distributes the force. But it doesn't. The aim is not to cause any penetration.
And it's not supposed to break open.
No, it's not supposed to break open. It won't break
Not
open.
supposed to explode.
Yeah, it just hits you. It's the same as if I threw a rock at you, it hit you, the rock wouldn't break open. It's the same thing. It just hits you and it stays together. The pellets, the reason the lead pellets are in it is to give it some weight for able to.
I used the wrong word that explodes, but as it leaves the barrel, it expands and it becomes approximately several centimetres, square centimetres, and hits the body like my hand is half open.
They used to have an old beanbag round which came out as a pillow, as a square, but we don't use them. We use a different one, looks like a sock with some tails on it. But it covers probably an inch square circumference, yeah.
When it hits the body, it's a square.
Yeah.
The next three in your list there are 40mm exact impacts, direct impacts, OC and CS.
That's correct, yep.
So they're 40mm cartridges, are they, which directly impact and hit the body?
Yes,
So it's like being shot, except the round is not lethal.
that's correct.
Do they, the direct impact OC and direct impact CS, do those cartridges which are shot and which hit the body, do they also contain those chemicals?
Yes, they do. So it's a polystyrene cup, and when the cup hits you, it breaks open and it releases a powder, being OC or CS. The aim is that you've been hit to distract you, and then all of a sudden you're affected by the agent. So it's a very effective way of being struck by something and
Overpowered by the chemical.
with the chemical. Because if you're engaging people at great distance and you might hit them, they could still throw something or be a threat at you. With the agent, it affects their eyes, they can't see, or they start
Quite some period of time, correct?
up to 15 minutes. Some people can get affected by it. And some people are really sensitive, some people they're not. So it depends on the
It's just a bit
individual.
of luck.
Yep.
What about pepper balls? Same idea?
Yeah, the pepper ball has a lot smaller projectile, so
It's a lot longer lasting. Does it last up to an hour and a half, the effect?
no, because the pepper ball Parva round, which is very, very small, it just has an immediate effect on what it is, and it's the same as the OC. It depends on the person.
Alright. Down the bottom to the left it says 40mm exact sponge. Is that the same as the exact impact you referred to on the top?
Yeah, the exact impact sponge. It's a foam round.
Alright. Anyway, you didn't have all of those when you landed at Yuendamu on the belly in the
We
arm.
didn't have any of the munitions with any chemical agent in, no.
You didn't get down until early the next morning.
Yes.
Alright. Just looking more broadly at the evidence you've given today, you seem to be a bit confused about whether you describe TRG as a paramilitary organisation or not. Can I suggest at the beginning of your evidence you were describing how the unit worked and so on, and you did describe it as a paramilitary organisation. Do you accept that from me?
I may have described it, but I don't think I said the word paramilitary.
Okay, well, take it from me that you did, because we checked with quite a few people in the room and we heard you say it.
Okay.
All right. But I just want to explore that word with you for a moment. You identify, and now we won't quibble about whether you said it or not, okay? The point is, I'm picking up what I heard you say, and whether you think you said it or not, no longer
If you
matters.
said I did it, I'm happy to accept that.
Okay. But I'm going to use the word now because it's a fair enough word to describe TRG, isn't it?
Look, from an outsider point of view, potentially yes, but from a police perspective, no.
Well, it's a unit which adopts, it integrates military training. You do training with the Australian Defence Force, TRG. Had trainers come over from ADF?
No.
No?
No, we use ADF facilities, but we don't have ADF people come and directly train police. No.
This is just from this morning to focus your mind so we don't waste time in the next 5 or 10 minutes. As a team leader, as a sergeant, you have a greater situational awareness, and as a tactical commander or officer in charge of situations bigger. This is you I'm quoting, right?
Yep.
You just need to trust us, you need to do it, and you need to do it now. This is about getting instructions.
Okay.
So it's important that when you're told to do something, there's a lot of trust in there, and the discipline's important just generally. As a paramilitary organisation, we have rank, you respond to rank, you respect rank.
I guess, Your Honour, where I was referring to that is police is referred to paramilitary, that we have a rank structure, and most other agencies, being ambulance and, well, except for maybe the fire service and government agencies, don't have rank structure. So we're very similar in the military, that we have rank, and rank has responsibility, and we are obliged through the Police Administration Act to follow rank and follow instructions. That's where.
But unlike the rest of the police force, the way you describe your unit, which essentially you describe its excellence, and I'm not at all criticising that, but you describe its excellence. It's an elite unit, you don't quibble with that?
No.
Quite aside from the physical training, which I've just taken for granted is at a very high level.
Yes, it is.
The sorts of training that the members do would be beyond the capacity of most people, including most police officers, in terms of endurance.
Yes, we run a selection course to choose the people, or allow the people to be selected.
And then the way you progress through the unit, in terms of people like you closely studying the psychology of the people whom you're training, so that you don't get bad eggs or people who are going to crack under pressure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that you study them carefully so that you can decide whether they pass, and then if they pass, based on their psychological characteristics, you decide which part of TRG they might go into, correct?
No, that's not correct at all. We study them in relation to, we assess their trainability, their physical capacity, their aptitude, and their attention to detail, and a couple of other attributes. But what specialised area they go into could be a general expression of interest because they're interested in it, or, like I said before, we're short in that area and we want to train in that area to provide us capability.
Well, you also said depending on their characteristics, didn't you?
The characteristics in relation to their trainability, for example, if you're going to move into be a bomb technician, you have to have a good understanding of electronics, and you need to have a good understanding of reading material, manuals and so forth, and technology with the drones. So if we had someone who hadn't had any experience in learning or weren't very hands-on with electronics, I'm not going to make them try to be a bomb
technician. That point now. The underlying point is that the way that you work, the focus on excellence, on complete trust in each other, which you do have, don't you?
Yes, correct.
It's essential for the work you do, complete trust.
Yes, it is.
And complete readiness to follow a command, which you may not understand why Sergeant King is giving the command, but you sure know that you have to follow it immediately.
But there's also, if that command is unlawful or manifestly negligent.
Yeah, I'm just talking about how you operate on a good day.
Yes.
That's all very much the nature of a Special Forces military unit, isn't it?
I wouldn't say Special Forces, I would say any unit. I've worked in Casuarina Police Station, I give people instructions and I expect them to follow it.
It strikes me as odd that you're quibbling with this because it's the nature of the presentation of TRG that it's a force of excellence, of professionalism, of elitism and so on. That's how you present yourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
And it's a reality, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And it's,
Did they get a bit of a shock at Kasarita when you arrived?
It was a bit of both, Your Honour. I think that at one point they were asking a lot of questions. They enjoyed, I guess I have good leadership skills, I hope. But yeah, I think they did, and they valued some of the opinions I did, and I brought a whole different perspective to Frontline that some of them hadn't been exposed to before.
and you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you say you're in the military as well, in the reserves?
I'm with
North
North Force, that's correct, yes.
And have you been in North Force for a long time?
20 years next month.
Okay, so North Force 20 years ago was actually part of the Special Action Forces of the Army, wasn't it?
No, I
In
disagree.
command with SAS, signals and other units like that?
When it was created in 1984, it had a strong affiliation with Special Forces, but when I joined in 2002, that wasn't the case at all. Yeah, it was its own entity of the Defence Force.
One of the matters that's come up in this hearing is the number of ex-military people who are and have in the last 10 years applied to join the Northern Territory Police. And some of the skills that are suitable for your unit are taught in some parts of the Army. So are you able to give us an idea of how many of your successful recruits on an annual basis are coming from the Australian Defence Force?
Recruits as an NT Police or recruits for
Recruits
TRG?
into TRG.
Or when I was there from last year. It's hard to say. I think there will always be a couple there.
How many people join TRG a year?
Well, it depends on the vacancies. If we have vacancies, we apply, but it also depends how many people pass selection course as well.
Sure. Just
So-
give us a rough idea. I mean, do more than 10 people join a year?
Oh, it's a very hard question to answer. I would say that we get between maybe 6 to 10 people apply, and we would probably have a pass rate of 25%. Of those people who pass selection, and then from then they have to go through an internal selection process throughout the agency to actually come to us. So even though you pass, they still have to apply for gazetted positions. It still sits before a panel, and that panel will still choose if they come to us. We have no governance over who comes to us. We just basically say, you've passed selection, you're eligible to apply, and it's up to the unit.
So you might only get a few new faces a year,
Yes,
correct?
yes, correct.
And are you able to say how many of those typically in the last, say, you were there for how many years?
18 and a half.
So in those 18, let's say the last 10 years, how many of those were
Well, I know we've got members who have come through with military backgrounds, and there's people with military backgrounds still within the unit, but I couldn't tell you how many. I'd have to look that up. And even then, I couldn't be entirely accurate. And I couldn't even give you a percentage, sorry.
good one?
I couldn't even give you a percentage to try and average that out.
The one thing I thought I heard you say earlier today was that you were sometimes involved in general support tasks as TRG.
Yeah, that's right.
So we've heard quite often in this court the discussion of general duties work by police. Is that the same thing?
No.
Okay, so just to explain what general support task is.
The general support task could be a bomb response, search and rescue, close personal protection, or even just supporting the front line in a special operation such as the V8 supercars, a youth operation for youth crime, going to a football carnival, that sort of stuff. It's supporting the front line in a capacity where the risk was perceived to be subsidiarily lower than...
Some of the items you just mentioned, and some of them seem natural to TRG, like bomb scenario.
Yep.
And others seem natural to normal policing work, like going to a youth sporting event.
That's correct.
So you've got TRG doing both those things,
Yes,
and you roll it all under the heading of general support tasks.
that's correct.
Well, one of the things that impressed, I'm sure, most people in this room when you spoke about it earlier today was the capacity and focus on self-reflection, not only yours but within the unit, and the way that you seek to learn about what you do by self-reflection. You agree that's an outstanding quality of TRG?
Debriefs, yes, but as an organisation we always conduct debriefs after operations as well.
When you're given a task to go to a youth concert or something like that, do you conduct any kind of analysis on whether it's appropriate for an elite force like yours to go out into policing the general community in that way?
Well, the analysis for us being used is decided at the superintendent level. So the superintendent requests us, our superintendent will look at it and see whether it's viable. It goes to our OIC to see, like I said before, whether we've got the staff to assist with that, and then from there we'll go where needed. We're happy to help the organisation whenever they need us to do it, as long as it doesn't compromise our ability to respond to the community throughout the Northern Territory and other aspects.
So what I'm interested in, there seems to be this dichotomy, I suppose, between legal and legal, and I'm calling it paramilitary, whether you like it or not. I think that's an appropriate term. An elite paramilitary force with many of the qualities of an elite military force being deployed to control civilian population. Is that something that you reflect on when you get deployed for those general duties tasks?
No, not at all. To control them, we're there to support the requesting unit who asks us. We're all cops at heart. And we're all cops, all police officers, regardless of...
Cops?
Yeah, police. Yeah. So we're all police officers at heart, regardless whether we work for TRG or not. And I think it actually brings us great balance, because we are incredibly resilient and able and flexible and able to scale up to something like a Hoffman and running around with a firearm indiscriminately shooting people, right back to going to a youth crime incident where we've got people breaking into houses. And that's what actually makes us so effective at times as well.
Well, that is one perspective. The people who are in TRG, are they full-time members of TRG?
That's correct.
So when you go to work, if you're in TRG, it was clear from an answer you gave earlier today, you could say, I'm in TRG. There's no dispute about whether you're in it or not in it. It's clearly one or the other.
That's correct, yep.
You always go to work at a particular place, which is a TRG place, and do your work.
At our office, yeah.
Yeah.
Or at the office I used to work. But earlier you said today you sometimes arrive in the community to do your work, and in fact you stay in the police station. You effectively hide in the police station so that you're not seen until you can go and do the specific task that you've been sent to do. Yeah, that's correct.
And you appreciate that does sound extraordinarily different from the idea of community policing, of working with the community, building up relationships and trust in the community. It's an extremely different kind of task, isn't it?
Well, Your Honour, it is, but it depends on the task we've been sent. We've done this, we got sent to Port Keats to do warrants in the morning because people are outstanding, then we'll stay out of view because we know they will leave. If we're there just to bolster numbers and engage the community, we'll jump in cars and drive around and we'll talk to them. We'll talk to the kids and they go blue light, we'll turn the red and blue lights on, we'll get out and talk to them.
We'll come to how effective that might be in a minute. When you're in the TRG, you're using different weaponry to the rest of the police force?
We have access to different weaponry, yes.
Yeah, and it's not just access. When you go out and do a TRG task, as I've understood your evidence and other material, you're fully kitted up. You take a range of, if possible, chemical munitions and weapons, different kinds of guns, firearms.
For high risk operations, you're talking about? Yep.
But just, was going to Yuendamu classified as a high-risk operation?
Yes, definitely.
With your involvement with IRT, you've been involved in, you're 18 years in TRG. So you would have seen the development of IRT from 2016 through to 2019. You were involved in some of that?
Yeah, I never had an opportunity to go down and actually train the members themselves. I helped rewrite some lesson plans to make them more contemporary to what we're doing. And I spoke to the OIC of the station, Mike Williams, at that stage, to when he was writing the SOPs for IRT. He asked me to run my eyes over it quickly before it was forwarded to the OIC. But direct training of the members, no, I haven't had an opportunity to do that.
Not you personally, but your unit, TRG, was involved in direct training?
That's correct.
And some people from TRG ended up, I think Sergeant Ballards was he once in TRG?
That's correct.
So there's a personnel crossover there. Did people move from IRT to TRG?
We've had people who are in IRT pass selection and join the unit, yes.
Yeah. So the training, for instance, we've heard about, I think it's called green roll and black roll, green week and black week in the 2-week training course. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the terminology of the roles, yes.
Did TRG get involved in that training?
Yes.
But the whole training itself went for 2 weeks. They like roll and green or 1 week of each, as far as we understand it. Does that sound right to you?
About IRT.
Yes, I'm familiar. Yes, John. Yep.
The point I'm heading to, Sergeant, is that IRT is a bit of a shadow of TRG in some ways. It has weapons that other police don't use. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I
Apart
agree
from
with that.
TRG.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's been reference to stun grenades and flashbang grenades and
That's correct.
AR-15s and M4s and so on. That's all the weaponry of either TRG or IRT, but not the rest of the police force, correct?
Well, there are AR-15s throughout the police force already. During that time, we always had access to them, and now the patrol rifle is in every station, or aimed to be every station.
So the other weapons I mentioned, they're more the confines of the IRT and TRG.
Yes.
Have you seen the videos of the IRT around the houses on the 9th of November?
I've seen snippets in the media, but not.
Just snippets in the media?
Yeah, not as in the full.
You've never studied them and how the operation was carried out?
No.
So you're not in a position to form, to state an opinion on how well they did move through the houses and how well they carried themselves at those houses?
In Unit Moon?
Yes.
Like I said, I've only seen snippets of the media and bits and pieces throughout this inquest. I haven't seen
Would
it
it surprise you to know that the IRT members who were there on the 9th of November aren't able to tell this court who the team leader was of the 4 of them moving around the house?
Look, I can understand that because they didn't have a team leader.
Does it surprise? How do you know they didn't have a team leader?
Well, from listening to the inquest so far, and I'll go back a bit. I ran a team leader course for IRT, which was Mike Williams and his wife, Hayden Hunt and Lee Bones. Shortly after the Williamses left the organisation and Hayden got cancer, went back to Lee. So the aim of that was to provide IRT team leaders to make assessments and go to jobs and do stuff. We raised the issue about running another course, and I'm not too sure why another course wasn't run. But
there for a moment, because we won't just be having a question of language.
okay.
On the 9th of November, at the point leading to the arrest, which became a shooting, there were a number of IRT people going into one house and then another house. You understand that?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And questions have been asked in this court about who was in charge. Now, if you have 4 men on the ground carrying out an operation for a person who is 3 days earlier used an axe or a tomahawk against 2 police officers, which led to the whole scenario of IRT being there, would you expect out of the 4 men on the ground someone to be in charge so that decisions can be made by somebody when that decision needs to be made?
I'd agree with that.
You'd agree with that? And what do you call that person?
Well, that would be the team leader, whether
That's the word I was using.
through experience or rank, yes.
Yeah. So you'd expect for those 4 people, for one of them to be the team leader, so someone can make decisions and be accountable for difficult decisions on the ground which have to be made.
Yes, I agree with that.
So the question was, did it surprise you that there was no team leader when they were out conducting those tasks?
It's a difficult question, Your Honour. If they're raising there was no team leader present, I knew there wasn't a formal team leader that I trained present afterwards because I knew that Sergeant Bowles wasn't
That's a
present.
distraction. I'm not talking
Okay,
about whether
but-
someone went through a team leader course with you or Sergeant
Yeah,
Bowles or somebody else. We're talking about 4 men on the ground carrying out an operation with lethal weapons. One of them has to be in charge. Are you surprised to know that no one was in charge?
I'm surprised to know that no one nominated themselves that I am in charge of the team, yes. Formally nominated themselves.
What was the last thing you said?
Formally nominated themselves within the group that I'm in charge.
Well, it's worse than that because one of them thought Hawkins was team leader, another one thought someone else was team leader, one of them thought no one's team leader. That would be completely unsatisfactory from your point of view.
Well, yes, and we've seen the issues with it.
Just to clarify one earlier question and answer, Did you say that most of the jobs that you do at TRG, work when you're at TRG, were being called out to community? Now, I might have misheard you, that's why I'm asking you the question.
Most of the jobs we do at communities.
No, most of the jobs you do when TRG are called out were in communities, Aboriginal communities.
No, I wouldn't agree with
So
that.
that's me mishearing you, that's why I'm
Yeah,
asking the question.
yeah.
You asked about AR-15s and you, from Mr. Mullins in the back row there, and about the fear in the community that people carrying out AR-15s can generate. And you said you understand that fear, that people, when they see an AR-15, you understand the fear. So I just want to ask you, what do you mean by that? What is it that you understand when you say, I understand the fear that Aboriginal people in the community have when they see police with AR-15s in their eyes?
I guess the thing is that they're just not used to seeing police armed with those weapons, and it's a case of education, understanding why they're there and what they're there for when they wouldn't normally see it. As I think it puts down to the community as well. As a whole, we were not used to people parading. We see them in airports now, and we see what we see overseas. It takes a bit of adjustment from their perspective. They're going, "Why do you need that? What's that here for? We're not going to hurt you."
Now, Sergeant, I'm going to ask you some questions about the video that you've been shown. And some of my questions will seem to be critical of you personally, but I want you to understand in the context, you've spoken a lot in this court about the professionalism of your unit.
Yes.
And no one's doubting the excellence of the work that the unit does, or the professionalism of the unit. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And I think everyone is impressed by your comments on self-reflection and so on. And I've been asking you about questions to do with being a paramilitary unit, and which is something that I'm interested in for my client in this court. And I'm going to contrast some of what you've said with what you perceive yourself to be doing. When you were with Sergeant Frost and, is it Sergeant Jang?
Zhang.
Is your sergeant as well?
Yeah.
At the Robertson house, you had the video played to you. And when you arrived there, you essentially said, amongst other things, you said that we're here, the TRG are here. Follow?
Yes, correct. This is the death message when we went to the first house in the morning. When I
And
said,
then you say that the TRG here is because we have beanbag shotgun and other stuff. So you're announcing in fact that the TRG, do you know whether or not, because I might have missed it from an earlier piece of evidence or something, do you know whether or not the people to whom you're speaking had any idea what the TRG was?
I believe they did, because when I was down there in 2010, we had an active role in those riots and up to about 10 days afterwards.
So anyone from that time would know that the TRG were the sort of people you get in when there's a dangerous riot?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what you're referencing when you say the TRG here and we're here with beanbag shotguns, right?
That's correct.
Now, do you accept from me that what you're really saying there, that the message you're delivering, to put it colloquially, is that there's a pretty tough and serious police unit here and we've got weapons that can hurt you? That's the message you're delivering.
Look, in hindsight, I probably admit that it probably wasn't appropriate to mention we had that weaponry. I could have said, we're here, we're down here before, we're here to make people safe. But it was no way, shape or form to intimidate people that we've got these weapons. It wasn't the intent. That wasn't the intent.
Okay. Do you accept that it was the effect of your words? You announced the presence of an elite, tough unit, a unit of very tough men, and you're saying, by the way, we're here, there's been a shooting, we've got the beanbag shotguns. That's the effect of what you're saying.
The effect of what I was saying is that they said, who are that mob over there? So they said, TRG mob. I wanted them to understand who we were and why we're down, because we look different, we behave different, we'll probably have a more active role in the community than the local members, and you're going to see us around for a while where Alice Springs members are flying in, flying out. That was all that was intended for. So if you see me, you know who I work for.
You see you've switched, Sergeant. I'm not saying what you intended. I'm
Okay.
pointing your mind to what the effect of what you said was. The effect of what you said was to announce the extremely tough, well-armed men are in town. That's the effect of your words. Do you accept that?
It could be perceived by that. That was as the effect, yes.
And then you went on to say, just to be clear, I'm the sort of guy who comes down here when there are riots. And 3 or 4 times today, you referenced your familiarity with the community of Yundamoo, with the fact that you turn up when there's a riot.
Not always the case. I mentioned search and rescue incidents as well.
That's what I'm putting to you. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Just finally, this question of you announcing to the people to whom you were speaking in that house that this was not a case for shooting for no reason. And the evidence basically is, from what the transcript is and what you've said today, is that the policeman did what he did because he thought he was going to die because he got stabbed. Right? That's what you said to the people at the time.
Correct.
And you've defended those words several times today. Can I suggest to you what you've done there is immediately announce, as you would say, controlling the narrative, that there's been an act of self-defence by the shooter, that he was being stabbed, he thought he was going to die, so he had to shoot. That's the message that you're intending to announce. Correct?
Yeah, I agree with that.
You speak about controlling the narrative, and what I suggest to you there is not that you're controlling the narrative, but that you're creating the narrative. You're creating a narrative that it was a legitimate shooting because it was self-defence. Correct?
I wouldn't say legitimate at that time because, well, yes, at the point at that time I could, but my aim was to tell them, again, this wasn't done for no reason. There's no need to get overwhelmed that police have done the worst thing. There's two sides to the story here. Let's just use some time to absorb
With
this.
respect, Sergeant, you don't seem to have any sense of what a shocking thing it is that you said. What you said was, this was self-defence. In other words, the person who died because he was lawfully killed by the policeman.
Logic thing, right? That's not the words that he used.
I'll give you the words that he used.
Well, use the words he used.
The reason the policeman did what he did was because he thought he was going to die, because he got stabbed.
Yes.
You're proposing an action of self-defence.
Yeah,
He thought he was going to die, that's why he shot.
I agree that can be perceived
And
like
you're
that, yes.
suggesting plainly that it was a legitimate thing to do.
I guess from my perspective as a police officer, I probably thought it was justified.
That's
Fine.
right. You thought it was
Right.
justified because it's legitimate self-defence.
Yes.
And as one of the other counsel put to you, the effect of that is to say it's the fault of the person who died.
Well, that's a perception that could be taken from the family.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But in fact, you had no idea whether any of that was true, did you?
And I did explain that detectives and everyone else had to get to the story and find out what happened.
Sure. That came later. But at that time, what you were doing was creating a narrative which you wanted to control, as you've repeatedly said, but you had no idea whether it was true. You agree with that?
Yeah, correct.
For all you know, the shooter was not acting legitimately. Now, I'm not suggesting he was or he wasn't. I'm just putting it to you. For all you know, he was not acting legitimately, correct? It's plainly correct, isn't it?
Well, it is, but also when the members... Yeah, you're right, yes. I didn't know factually, I wasn't there, so there's no way I could have determined whether that actually happened or not. Yes.
For all you know, the shooter was behaving in a completely unacceptable way.
That's
Correct.
Yep.
For all you know, he was excessively violent and filled with malice. For all you know. You accept that?
Well, there's always a potential, but again, I had to weigh up the situation of the end result, which was to make sure no one else got hurt.
And you chose to do that by inventing a narrative which fitted with how you perceive things should run.
I think in fairness, invention is a bit strong.
All right,
The
all right, I'll
information
pull it
was
out.
related.
I'll withdraw that. You chose to do that by creating a narrative.
Yes.
All right. No further questions.
Your Honour, I think Mr Edwardson is next. I just note the time. Mr Edwardson.
No, there's,
I've got a couple of brief questions, but I can wait till after the adjournment, Your Honour.
no, you can go now, Mr. Zishivanescu.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Good afternoon, I won't say your name, we've got no idea what it was.
I appear for NT Health. You still have your statement there?
Yes, do.
Paragraph 41.
Yes.
Over the page on my version, you discuss some of the actions you took on Monday, the 11th of November 2019. That's the Monday after Kumanjayi died.
That's correct.
To ensure that medical assistance was available to the community.
Yeah, that's correct, yep.
I want to ask you about your knowledge at the time in relation to other medical support that was available to the community. Were you aware that extra nurses had been deployed to Laramba and were providing emergency cover to Uendamo at that time?
I have a brief recollection that there were other health services in the area, but they had nothing immediately provided to me within the community itself.
Were you aware that police had only confirmed to NZ Health that morning that it was safe for nursing staff to return to Uendamo?
No, I was not aware. No.
And that following that confirmation, nurses travelled by ambulance to Uendamo to reopen the Uendamo clinic?
I can't recall when that happened.
So you weren't aware that the clinic was open by 1:30 p.m. that afternoon?
I know that the night before I asked what's our medical capacity or response to the community to be able to provide them assistance. And when I spoke to them that morning, or is that the Monday morning? This paragraph, the Monday morning, I was told we're working on it, and that's when I sought approval to use the Ulamoo ambulance to provide that capacity to the community. So if that was happening, it would probably been happening in the background with the IMT and or the forward commander, but I wasn't aware.
Sure, so it wasn't communicated to you that there was extra nurses available?
No, I think I just got told they were either on their way or they were there at some stage, but I can't recall when.
Thank you. No further questions.
Yes.
Do you want me to start that straight away? Or right. By the way, I don't think I'll be at hours of that.
I think we'll take a break. I just want to say, are you aware that the community at least had expressed to us how upset they were by what they perceived to be as a very heavy-handed and uncalled for policing response after this incident?
In what context, Your Honour? In the days following, or?
Yeah, in the days following. So, for example, police standing with rifles at the house and also at the community shop.
Yeah, I'm not
Did you
aware.
see that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not aware of the one at the shop. I don't know where that's come from. I'm
All
aware.
right, well, I think we've got photos of it.
Yeah, I'm aware of the crime scene. I've seen that in the media, but yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Not at the shop?
I know we certainly have photographs of armed guards at House 511. I'm not sure whether we have photographs of anyone at the shop.
The house.
Okay.
All right. Certainly there's been some evidence that it was at the house.
Yes.
And a young lady who gave evidence, Samara Fernandez Brown, said that she went to the police station
Yes.
to try and obtain some information, and she found the police officer, who I think she said was in a camouflage uniform.
That was me, Your Honour. It was myself and Terry. I remember that
You
conversation.
remember that conversation?
I remember that conversation, yes.
All right. Well, she felt that there was a complete lack of empathy being shown for her as a member of the community, wanting to inquire about the circumstances of a family member being shot.
Yeah. It was surprising when I read that, because when she came, to start with, Terry and I had to work out who she was. We were really conscious of who in the family was speaking to. When she said she represented them, that was fine. I don't believe I came across unempathetic. She was quite good. She asked what happened. We told her. She said, what happens next? We told her. And when she left and walked, Terry and I actually thought we had a good inroad into the community through those two, Samara and a friend. So I was a bit disheartened to read that I came across. Like, if I did, I apologise to her. That was never my intention. But we had a good conversation for at least 20 minutes. And I wish I had that on body worn, but I think both our body worns were being charged or downloaded for the detectives for crime scene, because I don't believe it came across
I
like
think the conversation with Rakisha was good.
that. Rakisha.
Yeah, when he went to the house, the first conversation that we've been watching.
Look, watching the video today, I can understand definitely how it comes across like that. But what you can't see is the people in the background getting a little bit antsy, but a little bit uptight. And when I interjected and said to her, "Come to the station," was because she started getting the line of accusing Sergeant Frost of, "You're going to bring him out here and shoot him like a dog or something," or words to that effect. And I was just trying to say, look, get the messaging out and then go. But yes, there could have been a lot more empathy in talking about that, but I was also conscious of didn't want to spend too much time talking to them and trying to justify either way. I just wanted to let them get on and do their thing.
And there were roadblocks
Roadblocks?
into and out of the community?
No, that's a good question, actually. So what happened there was I was asked, we were receiving information that a significant amount of family was coming in from Alice Springs, potentially bringing alcohol and weapons. There was talk about family coming from Largemano and Kalkarinji, all coming to you in the move. And we're going, well, we need to get some assessment of that. So I was asked to send members out to Tillmouth Well and just talk to people and find out what's happening. I got a call probably about a couple of hours after they were there saying someone had released to the media that we had armed line blocks with people with rifles stopping people coming out. I said, that's not true. I rang one of the members who was out there, and I can't recall who it is, and I said, what are you doing? He says, we're having a meat pie. What are you doing? So we're just chatting to people. They were just talking to people. They weren't stopping people. They were just asking where you're from, what are you doing? And all that was to give an understanding of what cars were coming in and out. And I'm not aware of any roadblocks that I had any control over. There might have been ones otherwise, but there was never any intention for any roadblocks to stop people coming to the community, especially when sorry-buses started. It's definitely something we would want to stop. So is that the roadblock you're referring to?
I don't know, I'm just relaying the concerns of community. You just understand that there might be, whilst you might have legitimate reasons for taking certain actions and you might feel justified in those actions, there's a different perception out there by the community that in fact the response was very heavy-handed and lacking in respect. They had a community member shot by a police officer.
Yes.
They had not. I know there are some rocks thrown and very unfortunately the ambulance officer and perhaps a couple of police officers were hit by rocks. But by and large, the community had contained their response to what had happened.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you're right to that degree. That's why it's so important for us to liaise with Eddie or Samara and Derek Williams to, if there were any concerns or they had anything, to come and talk to us, to open that road of communication. And I understand our presence there could be seen as an agitation.
Do you think that people would be comfortable coming to speak to the police and being in a room by themselves with a police officer after someone has been shot, and when there are people standing around the community with long arms?
In response to asking witnesses to come forward, and that comment I made, well, yeah, you're right, there could not be, but it was difficult. I haven't been to a police shooting before. I've been to plenty of other circumstances where they have come up and they were keen and eager to tell us whatever.
This was different.
It was definitely different, yes, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
So there might need to be a little bit of reflection, putting yourselves in their shoes about the impact of what happened afterwards, taking into account also, of course, the communication issues and the delay.
Yes, I agree with that.
And communicating in a passing.
Yep.
And they do just, I'm told, you know, when we're talking about communicating information about passing, that would be a better way of referring to such an incident than in a more direct way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things there that, you know, I think that we can reflect on and learn from.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Religion,
All stand. Supreme Court assets and religion.
Last thing she said.
It's
Putting something